to Filmcopat. This week, we are starting with a new series of discussions on cinema appreciation. In this series, we would talk to renowned academicians studying, researching, and helping us appreciate the medium of cinema as a whole. Today, we have with us Professor Sudipto Acharyya. Professor Sudipto has studied cinema at FTII Pune with specialization in direction and screenplay writing. He has completed his MA in Film Studies from Jadavpur University, Kolkata. Professor Sudipto has a long engagement with teaching cinema in various institutions like FTII Pune, SRFTI Kolkata, Roopkola Kendra Kolkata, and Kolkata Film and Television Institute, Center for Film Television, Allahabad University. He is currently a senior faculty at Whistling Woods International, Mumbai. He is also part of an artistic research project involving BRICS nations that looks at social interstices with the help of cinema practices. Sudipto sir, thank you for coming. Thank you for giving so much time to us today. Today, the first question, sir, which I would like to ask you, the quintessential question, that why and how cinema affects us as a person, as a human being, as a social being?
To answer this question, we need to go back to some of the theorists, some important theorists of cinema who sort of liken cinema to a dreamlike condition, where we are immobilized, we are in a state of darkness, and we are looking at images which are glowing very, very brightly in this dark auditorium, where at the same time we are a collective as well as we are an individual because of the darkness, and we are completely immobilized or paralyzed in our state of watching these images, which are being bombarded at us at a visual level, at an oral level, and we are continuously trying to make a connection between these images. These images are disparate. These images are not continuous. Like life is continuous, cinematic images are not continuous. They are fractured. They are disparate. So just like the image of a dream, where which takes us to a symbolic order, similarly cinema also is a dreamlike condition, and even going further back, it is like the state of a child in the womb who can only listen in this in the womb and not see. So in terms of orally as well as in terms of looking, it reminds us, it takes us back to some of these very, very primal states. It's a very primal encounter, the encounter with cinema, and that is why its magic is unlimited, immaterial of the fact, quite unconcerned of the fact that what you are showing on the screen, what sort of material you are showing on the screen. The fact that there is a glowing image which is being projected, and that projection reaches you, and you are at its mercy. Whatever the image is, immaterial of the content of the image, it is this very shape of the image, the shape that is being formed by the darkness of the environment, by the glowing beam, by the sound that is coming, emitting from it, and sort of enveloping you, so the content is being given a shape. So it is this content, it is the shape of this content, or in other words, the form, which has a very primal evocation, and Therefore, its magic is never ending.
Right. Right.
And sir, how does this medium of cinema then varies from the other art forms like a painting, a literature, theater? How much of it is similar and how different is cinema to those art forms?
But if you talk about the narrative traditions, cinema has borrowed a lot from all of these mediums that you are talking about. Cinema has liberally borrowed from literature, from painting, from theater, and the traditions in other art forms. But where, to the extent that in the early years, it was even being proposed that cinema is not an independent art form. It is a mishmash of many other forms. It's a collage of many other forms. Still, we realize that cinema brings something to the table which the other art forms do not bring, and that is the temporality which we see in cinema. It is not that temporality is not there in the other art forms, but they're mostly about measuring time. Cinema is an art form which sort of is born with time. It is a temporal art form. Many people will tell you that cinema is a visual art form. No, it is not a visual art form. It is a temporal art form. It changes and evolves and grows and goes forward with time. And that is one aspect. The other aspect is the moral value of time, the moral quality of time. When I say moral quality, I do not mean in a very religious sense what is good or what is bad, but the very fact that you say that this place gives me an eerie feeling, or you say that time flies fast, or time came to a standstill, or it was a very breathless condition. We were at the edge of the seas. You are actually talking, when you talk like these, you are actually describing the qualitative aspect of time. So it is this moral quality of time which cinema brings to the table, which makes it very unique. So finally, cinema may not be about storytelling. Finally, I mean, many of the early practitioners of cinema were very excited to see this dance of light and shade. They never imagined that cinema will take the narrative route. Even I've heard that Rabindranath Tagore, when he was coming back from Italy on a ship, for the first time, he was shown cinema on the deck of a ship, and he had commented that this is a medium which is ideal for Gitinatto, for choreography. So nowhere are these early minds, many of these early minds, imagine that cinema will take the narrative route. Rather, they think that it is a very abstract sort of an art form which is very poetic in its possibilities, and can open up perception in a big way. So that is what I think is the difference, the temporality which cinema brings to it. I mean, even if you look at the word cinema, it comes from the word kinematics. Kinematics theke kinema, and kinema theke cinema. And kinematics is about the study of motion, and motion is always measured in terms of time and space. So temporality is something which is very central to the idea of cinema, which you do not encounter in the other art forms, whether it is literature or whether it is painting, which is like a frozen time, where time is completely frozen, or any other art form. So that is what cinema is, I would say, the essence of cinema.
Right, sir. Since you talked about how cinema affects us, could you also tell us how cinema affects our perception of time and space?
See, cinema is a medium at its best. It is a medium which sort of isolates time and isolates space. Isolates them from what? It isolates them from action. It isolates them from the flow of storytelling. Hmm. When you are listening, when you are looking at this particular frame from which I am talking to you, you know, what you are essentially looking and hearing at is my face. My face completely dominates this particular frame, and to the extent that you are not even willing to entertain what the other details are in the frame.
Right.
You know, and you are also not alive to the other sounds, the ambient sounds that are there in the frame, because the text that is being created through my speech has a very monopolistic sort of a claim on the oral space. Now imagine for a while that I find a technique by which you can efface my presence visually and orally from the frame. You know, what is left for you is to encounter the empty space. Say, for example, I move out for a while, you know.
Right.
You know, or I do this. For the next 3 minutes, I do this. And I stop talking, you know. So what happens? Your mind is now no more your mind is not being filled with speech, is not no more being filled by texts, is not being filled by the space, the hierarchy of the action, the human action. So now, for the first time, you are therefore free to interact with the details of the space, you know, and therefore along with it comes time as part and parcel. So it is only in cinema that you are able to mediate on space as an entity, you know, on space which can be looked at beyond its functionality. You know, otherwise you talk of a space, you talk of a school ground, you talk of a marketplace, you talk of a hospital, you talk of any space. That space always comes to your mind with its functionality. You go to the marketplace to buy fish. You go to the school ground to play football. You go to the hospital to meet a doctor. You know, supposing you go to these same spaces, but nobody is selling fish today. Nobody is selling anything today. You know? So how do you now there is nothing that is mediating your relationship with the space. You are now absolutely looking at the space in its bareness, without its functionality. So this does not happen in real life. I mean, this happens very rarely, very rarely. You know? Like, I can give you one example. There was one colony in Durgapur called MMTC. It is a public sector colony, a very thriving colony at one point of time. And then things change, the economy changes in the country, and MMTC is sold out. And the entire colony, not just MMTC, there is another colony called FCI in Durgapur. If you go there anytime, nobody lives in those colonies anymore. The houses are there, the lanes are there, the trees are there, the gates are there, the electric poles are there, but there are no human beings. There is no habitation anymore. You feel like you have come to a ghostly place. But when you go back to such a space, you know, suddenly the space starts to talk with you. Yes. Suddenly you realize that the evocation of the space. Suddenly you realize the possibilities of this space, much beyond their dimensions. Whether the road is a 10-foot road or a 15-foot road is not important. It provokes sounds. There is a park, and it provokes sounds of children playing in the park. It provokes sounds of women talking in their verandas. It provokes sounds of men playing carom in the community hall. And a myriad sounds, myriad sounds. Those sounds are not there, but the whole space starts speaking to you. But there is no action here because there is nobody, there is no human agency left to do the action. Now every swaying of a mango of a tree, the branches of a tree, becomes very, very underlined. Every sparrow calling from some corner of the building becomes important for us. We become alive to those signals. So it is only in cinema, probably, I think, where space and time can be isolated and mediated upon as an entity by themselves, where it is not subservient to a human action, where it is not subservient to a rigidly told narrative. In other words, space and time achieves an autonomy of itself. You see this as far as space is concerned. You see this more in the cinema of Michelangelo Antonioni. There's a phrase which he uses called temps mors, which means dead time. And what does dead time mean? Dead time means narratively it is a dead time. So an actor meets another actor, a character meets another character, they're talking on top of a cliff, they interact and they leave the space, but the shot refuses to cut. So you linger on with the space even after the actor has left the space. So for the first time, once the actors have left the space, like this, when I leave this space, you become conscious of what all constitutes this space. So narratively, that space has become dead, but it has taken a new life. It's called temps mors, the dead time. So I think in cinema, you encounter space and time in their own self.
Yeah, that was so profoundly beautiful, sir. Really, it was mesmerizing to hear you explain it with the analogy of a ghost town, because it is really true that when you visit somewhere like that, the space talks to us. And thank you so much for that explanation.
So moving on to narrative cinema, if you could explain to us, how the structure of a narrative cinema works and how does the conflict set in the narration?
Okay, so you want to go back to the age-old Aristotle. Well, the whole of narrative cinema is coming from the Aristotelian poetics, where it is trying to preserve the unity of space, time, and action. And with the coming of the Renaissance, that is the very fundamental basis of all Western art, the perspectival form in space, in time, and in action, where everything moves from a past time to a present time to a future time. When it comes to time, on the axis of space, things move from the foreground to the midground to the background. In the axis of action and characterization, it moves from internal characterization to outer characterization. From internal to outer to external. So there is always this telos of moving from here to there. So there is a very definite perspectival point towards which one is continuously traveling, and this is the foundation of the Western aesthetics of narrative. And once you understand this, the next important thing is the three-act structure, is where you tell a story with a very, very definite beginning, middle, and an end. And this beginning, middle, and an end is are not disparate, random. You know, the beginning, middle, and end are connected with a narrative logic, which you can also say is about causality. You know, karjo karon, we say in Bangla, you know, where every cause has an effect, and every effect, when you look at an effect, you understand that there was a cause, and when you look at a cause, you realize that there will be an effect. You know, Tarkovsky explains it as the two stages of an aircraft, spacecraft. You know, when the craft has moved sufficiently upwards, it ejects the lower part, and for that cause, the effect is the rest of the spaceship travels outside, goes out of the threshold of the Earth's threshold and moves into the space. So he says that, so that was the cause for which there was an effect. So that causality is what connects the beginning, middle, and an end. You must be knowing this very, very famous polemical dialogue by Godard when he was asked by one Western critic, why don't you believe in beginning, middle, and end? And he said in his own polemical way that of course I believe in the beginning, middle, and an end, but not there would be a beginning, middle, and an end order, but they may not come in a close fit. The beginning will not exactly result in the middle, or the middle will not lead you to an end. You know, so that is what a narrative structure roughly is. There is an inherent linearity of thinking. There is an inherent linearity of purpose. You know, now in the post-production, now in the manner of telling the story, you can reshuffle things. You can put instead of saying A B C D, you can say D B A C. You know, but that does not change the inherent linearity of the material that you are dealing with. You know, the fact that these elements A and B and C and D are inherently connected by a causal logic. You know, so it doesn't matter whether you start from D or whether you start from A. You know, you end up saying a linear narrative. You know, I mean, many students come and tell me that, sir, I watched a very non-linear film called Memento. You know, hang on, Memento is the most linear film I have ever seen. You know, a man's wife has been raped and killed, and he wants to go and take a revenge. That is as simple as that. So, but the way the story is being told is there is a pretension of non-linearity. You know, but essentially it is a linear story. You know, that is what roughly what a narrative structure, the way we understand it in the mainstream media, is all about.
In India, of course, we have a term called formula cinema. And what do we exactly mean by formula cinema? And what is this formula which actually works within the narrative structure of the cinema?
You know, if I ask you to generalize it, you know, I can generalize it in a beautiful way. Formula cinema is not limited to any mainstream media. You know, formula cinema is when a filmmaker becomes very, very predictive. You know, when I look at a Buddhadev Dasgupta film, if he goes out to make a film today, it is a formula cinema. Because when the track starts moving, I know where it will end, how long it will move. You know, I know very well. You know, for me, therefore, he is in his formula. For him, it is a formula. Formula is not just something which an industry discovers for itself. Right. A formula is something which also an individual filmmaker discovers for himself, and there is an initial euphoria with that discovery, and then finally that filmmaker becomes a very willing prisoner of that formula, and for the rest of the life is not able to move out of it. Believe me, I have seen very few filmmakers
So would you say, sir, if I give an example from absolute mainstream cinema, I do not know whether it is right or wrong, but there was a phase with David Dhawan where he was making these movies with Govinda, where he working with all this #1 series one by one he did. Would you call it something in that milieu?
Of course, David Dhawan comes from a particular type of comedy, which is very, very formulaic, which is can be compared to burlesque or some traditions in acting, which is very frontal in its scope, and there are gags which are very much on your face, so of course that is formulaic, but and the formula that comes from the industry is very well pronounced. We don't make a mistake. We never make a mistake of um, finding those formulas, but what I am trying to point out is that even an alternative filmmaker is a prisoner of his or her own formula. That is the thing. You see one film and you have seen all the films of that director. So that is a film. I'm saying there are very few filmmakers. Maybe Nagisa Oshima, Jean-Luc Godard are one of those very, very few filmmakers, who not tried, but who were extremely successful in completely reshaping their idea. There were certain basic ideas which continued to remain with them, but their form evolved from one film to the other film to the other film. And you must, if you read JLG on JLG, he clearly says that Breathless is a bourgeoisie film. He completely denounces his own film. So that is when you actually defy the formula that you have made for yourself. Right. Then like a snake leaves off its skin. It's not easy for a filmmaker to leave your identity of your signature and try to look for a new signature.
Right.
So,
since we talk about the mainstream narrative cinema, and there is this word which is much maligned these days and kind of has a negative connotation associated with it, which is melodrama, similar to the word propaganda. So originally not intended to be negative, but would you tell us a little bit about the importance of melodrama in Indian cinema?
Melodrama is a mode of address. How you are telling a story, and essentially we witness melodrama in family dramas, in marital, in homes, in relationships pertaining to the home, and it becomes even more important. It plays a big role in Indian cinema, where you are looking at a family and finally you are trying to tell the story of either Ramayana or Mahabharata. It is not a family which has dropped from the sky. It is a family which is bound by archetypes which has been handed over to us for over generations, for over millennia. So finally, whether you are telling a very modern day family drama, or whether you are telling a historical family drama, a period family drama, you are essentially referring to the known archetypes. And to arrive at these epic narratives, to arrive at an epic dimension, melodrama becomes a very, very important tool which takes you away from the register of realism. The register of realism does not go well with the epic narration. And it is for this epic narration, to arrive at an epic narration, melodrama as a mode of address is a very interesting vehicle or a device that has been used over and over and over again. There is absolutely no problem with this with this form, you know. For generations, folk theater, for jatra, even avant-garde filmmakers made great use of melodrama, and it has been used to, you know, move audiences, you know, into making very, very touching narratives. You know, Ritwik Ghatak was one person who was continuously um, uh, living on melodramatic modes of address. But one needs to understand what Ritwik Ghatak is doing. You know, I mean, like a Bollywood filmmaker is also using melodrama, and Ritwik Ghatak is also using melodrama. Are the two things one and the same thing? One and the same? Certainly not. The difference is as stark as chalk and cheese. You know? When we talk about mainstream cinema, which can be very, very manipulative, melodrama is used to pick pockets. While you are busy wiping your tears, your pockets are being picked. You know, you come to the theater to cry, for some sort of a immersion into um, uh, into uh, into very, very forceful emotions, and it is this immersion, you know, that sort of paralyzes you, that do not allow you to put on your critical hat, which do not allow you to analyze. But when we look at a cinema of at the cinema of Ritwik Ghatak, any film, Megadagatara, Shubarno Rekha, you know, Titash, you know, any film that you talk of his, you know, melodrama comes hand in glove with a very, very radicalizing effect. With the help of melodrama, he is actually radicalizing our texts, whether it is Ramayana or whether it is any other, the Puranas, you know. He is doing it continuously. For example, if you look at Subarna Rekha, you know, the old man comes to the rescue of this little girl called Shita and tells, "Where is your home?" She points at the distant horizon and says, towards that direction, and then he asks, "What is your name?" And she says, "My name is Shita." And he asks, "Have you read Ramayana?" She says, "No." And then he starts talking about Ramayana. And the way the old man narrates, or rather, he doesn't narrate, he introduces Ramayana. One can clearly see that in the hands of Ritwik Ghatak, Ramayana has become Sitayana, where Ram is bracketed by the entry and exit of Sita. You know, so there is a hierarchy which he is creating. So he absolutely where he absolutely and quite correctly, you know, appropriates the story of Rama into and molds it into the story of Sita.
Yep.
I mean, you go back to that scene in the aerodrome sequence where this man is introducing little Sita to the story of Ramayana. The very introduction tells you that Ghatak, more than Ramayana, is interested in Sitayana. You know, so it's a very melodramatic scene, but see what he is doing with the melodrama. He is reversing it on its own head and making it extremely radical in its scope and forcing you to think. You know, your heart might be broken there. You feel a big punch in your heart, and at the same time, your consciousness is raised. You do not give away your consciousness. It is as if you are made to face 100-watt bulb in your eyes. You know? You cannot look away from it. It is that forceful. You know, that is how he is employing melodrama, and it is a technique which comes straight from Eisenstein, where he's using very, very powerful images to very, very analytical ending, to very, very powerful images that are stored in our memory as archetypes, and those archetypes are being used to act finally take us to an analysis, not towards an immersion. So there's a huge difference between immersion and analysis. So that is what melodrama is. That is what the melodrama of Ghatak is, as opposed to the melodrama of mainstream cinema. Which melodrama of mainstream cinema absolutely immobilizes you.
Sir, if we talk about genre cinema, so in India, in Indian cinema, we have not seen much. We have comedy, we have drama, but not much actually. So why do you think that is the case?
Oh, you are touching a huge area, and I may not be completely qualified to talk on this, but genre is a type of organization, one can say, which Hollywood devised very, very early. That's the studio system in Hollywood devised it, and instead of depending upon the genius of a director, they thought that they would depend upon the genius of a system, and that system were genres, and various genres were formed, and we know how genres operate. They over a period of time, they create a whole library of templates, and audiences who are cued into a particular genre, they know these templates very, very well, and so there are certain genre expectations with which an audience comes to the auditorium theater, and the director sort of plays around with that genre expectations to create a tension. Either it is resolved or the tensions are not resolved. So it is like the retelling of the same story over and over and over and over again. If you look at Indian cinema, yes, we do not have all those genres which Hollywood has invented for itself, but the Indian cinema, or the mainstream Bombay cinema, which now is called as Bollywood, is today itself a genre in itself. And Indian cinema in the West is known by Bollywood cinema, and it's masala, the song and dance and the subplots and every other thing that sort of defies the narrative structure of the Western narrative, the structure of the Western narrative, so where there are subplots, where there are gags by comedians, and then there are action sequences. So there are many attractions, and these attractions are sort of puncture the narrative, and then you again come back to the narrative, and again you are on track, and you don't have problem in relating with the narrative, and then the narrative goes ahead, and at one point it is again punctured by a dance, and song, and you enjoy the song for the next 5 minutes, which has got nothing to do with the main narrative, and you again come back to the narrative. Then maybe the next item is a gag by a comedian, which is again so that is how an Indian mainstream movie operates, with many attractions, almost like a circus show. Yeah. But it works fantastic for us, for Indian audiences. It works absolutely in a beautiful way for us, and there are enough scholarship on that which will tell you that how it has long roots in Parsi theater, in folk theater, in various other folk traditions in various other parts of the country. The way Ramayana is retold. So it has its own cultural embellishments. It is not about Indian cinema is not about ignorance of the Western narrative. Rather, it is about propounding your own narrative traditions.
Thank you, sir.
So, sir, that this was an extremely interesting session on narrative cinema. We have been truly enriched and to hear from you, and possibly even the people who will watch this. I do not think they have heard such conversations on cinema at this level.